So if you feel like you're dealing with some fatty liver issues, in this video I'm going to help you understand what seems to be some very common causes creating this issue, and I'm also going to share some steps that people are taking that really seem to be turning the trouble around. You don't want to miss this.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Now just remember that I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving you any medical advice. I don't want anything that you learn here to restrict someone from seeking medical help if they need it, because this can be a significant issue and it really seems to sneak up on a lot of people. So in this video, it's likely that I'm probably going to tell you some things that you might not want to hear, and that's okay. That's the way that we roll. We have this love-hate relationship thing going where I love to tell you things that you don't want to hear and then you just hate me. So we'll just kind of keep that dynamic going because this can be important. And it seems to go in some stages with this whole fatty liver thing. And we're basically talking about the non-alcoholic fatty liver issue. And we start off with that, but then it seems to create some inflammation in there, and you get that NASH version where inflammation is involved, and then that can progress to the cirrhosis that includes a lot more inflammation and even some malfunction that really seems to be going on with the liver. And then eventually it turns into the, oh, I got to get on a list and hope that somebody gives me their liver because mine's not going to work anymore. So that's not a list that you want to be on. But what's really incredible about this liver that appears to be kind of like a ninja is that it has the ability to regenerate if we just give it a chance. So we're going to look at some things here to see if we can put ourselves in a position to allow that liver to go back to functioning the way that it's supposed to function a little more. And one of the more common things that I hear from people is them saying, oh, I don't even eat any fats. How do I have a fatty liver? And it appears to be more of a storage situation. So basically when we eat carbohydrates or sugars and the body turns that into glucose, the body will either burn that up immediately or it will store it in the form of glycogen. And it stores that glycogen in our muscles or in our liver. And it stores that so that it can be used a little bit later if we run out of glucose. The problem is that storage is not very big. We can't store a whole lot of carbohydrate or sugar or starch in the form of glycogen for fuel later. So once those stores are filled, the body's got to be like, well, what do I do with this now? I can't store anymore. All of those storage compartments are filled. So the body converts those carbohydrates or sugars into fats so that they can be stored. And these fats can be stored in fat cells, and then we get bigger, and then we have to buy bigger pants. And we know all about that story, but when it gets to a large level and a big accumulation of these fats, they can also end up here. And this can become very problematic. So we want to look at what's creating that. And what we really want to look at when we're looking at this storage problem is that since there is this specific amount that we can store in the form of glycogen when we're eating carbohydrates and sugars, we really need to reduce our sugars, our starch, and our fructose. If this is a problem, this is screaming that this is a problem. And the reason this can be confusing is because early in life we may be able to eat a whole lot of this kind of stuff and everything works out fine because we're very efficient at processing that glucose correctly. But as a variety of issues can cause us to become more insulin resistant, and maybe we're not processing that glucose as efficiently as we used to, then more and more glucose is going to accumulate in the bloodstream, and the body's like, well, what do I got to do with this? And it's going to turn into this fat, and then we have these types of problems. So when we're looking at trying to correct this problem, this is the first place we need to look. That means that we need to get rid of all sugar. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to have sugar on some of my meals. You know, a lot of people will do things that they know aren't really healthy, but they'll just do them as long as they can get away with it. Well, this is a wake-up call. This is saying that you're not getting away with it anymore. So it's something that you're going to have to turn around in order to turn this around. So we want to get rid of all this sugar, the starch, and the fructose. That means like soda and especially like fruit juice. You know, fructose kind of processes a little differently than glucose does, and the liver is a lot more involved in processing that fructose. So there's a lot of people that feel like the fructose can even be a bigger problem than the sugar. So especially now that a lot of our sweeteners have been replaced with this high fructose corn syrup, it tells you right there in the name, the fructose is very high. And understand that there's a big difference between eating a little bit of fruit and giving the body a lot of fructose. A little bit of fruit, and I mean a small amount, like 100 calories worth of fruit, is about as much as the body can really process at a time efficiently. Beyond that, it has the ability to create trouble for a lot of people who are not processing their sugars as well as they might have when they were whippersnappers. But if you can understand that your body may not operate the same way that it did when you were 13, then it's easy to understand that you probably don't want to stand there and say, hey, can you hold my 32-ounce fountain drink while I look on my phone to figure out why I have fatty liver issues? That's the problem. We really don't want to be drinking these liquid sugars because the liquid sugars hit our system even harder than a candy bar would. Those liquid sugars go right in, nothing is going to slow them down, and they spike our insulin higher, which pushes us more towards that insulin resistant problem, and that's going to elevate the blood sugar in the system and lead to all this trouble. So if you've seen any of my videos, you know that I'm a fan of moderation. I like to help people help their body function at a higher level so that they might be able to get away with a little bit more enjoyment. But this here is a problem. And if you have this in the house and you're wanting to fix this, this has to go in the trash can. You don't want it in the house because you don't want to be ingesting it. If you have soda in the house, it should go in the trash can. This is a significant problem that you're going to have to put effort in to correct, but the exciting thing is that you can correct it. Speaking of your trash can, let's talk about vegetable oils. And I'll put some links in the description below, some data where there's people who feel like this is really the problem with this fatty liver stuff. It's the vegetable oils that we're cooking with and that we're consuming today that are so problematic and so inflammatory. So much of this problem seems to gravitate around inflammation. And we know that these are really inflammatory in the body. These are not fit for human consumption. If you have them in your house, you should put them in the trash can and see what they look like there. If they look great in your trash can, leave them in the trash can. It's a problem. We should be cooking with things like butter and animal lard and bacon grease and coconut oil and these saturated fats that can withstand that type of heat and that are not as problematic as these vegetable oils. These are a big problem, and you're not going to find in nature something that's going to give you 20 times the omega-6 that a human should be having. So this is a big problem that it is easy to avoid by just not participating. You know, it's on your shopping list, you cross it off the shopping list. It's that easy. So let's look at number 3, which is we need to be able to manage insulin resistance. Because again, we might reduce the amount of carbohydrates or sugar or some of this other junk that we're eating, but if our body is not processing those carbohydrates effectively, then the blood sugar is still going to go really high and still lead to the same problems that consuming all these foods can lead. So a great way to do this is by restricting the sugar and the starch. I'm going to put a link to a study below that is just unbelievable when it comes to this topic. And it was a study where they had the participants use what they called a Spanish ketogenic Mediterranean diet. But it was a diet that really restricted carbohydrates and raised some fats, and all the participants had fatty liver issues, and the results were unbelievable. They were unbelievable to the point where like triglycerides that were in the 2 something were dropping down to like 111. It was drastic changes, and almost all of them saw major improvement to this issue, and everybody saw some improvement. And it wasn't an extended study either. So I'll put the link in the description below, and you want to look through that and understand that this keto thing might be very effective for this, but that doesn't mean that I think that everybody needs to do a ketogenic diet to correct this fatty liver issue. I think that if you can just restrict the carbohydrates and allow insulin to come down so that the body can become more receptive to that insulin, that you can improve a lot of these issues. I don't even feel like a ketogenic diet is right for everybody because some people with digestive malfunctions or specific imbalances, a ketogenic diet can really magnify those problems. And if you want to learn more about that, we'll put a link in the description for our video on who should not use a ketogenic diet. But the important thing is just to bring those carbs down. So one thing we like to see people do is cycle their carbs. So if you do feel like you do still need some carbohydrates, maybe you leave the carbs out for breakfast and for dinner, and you just put some carbs in the middle of the day. So what that does is Over the night, when we're not eating, that allows insulin to come down. And insulin takes a lot longer to come down than blood sugar does. So you need a good stretch of time to allow it to come down so that the cells can become more receptive to it. When insulin's high all day, yelling at the cells all the time, the cells are like, yeah, I'm not listening to that anymore. And that's how we become insulin resistant. That's one of the major factors. But if we can let that insulin come down, then the cells can become more receptive. So if we leave the carbs out of breakfast, then that's extending that window of time while we slept where insulin had to come down. And if we can leave the carbs out of dinner, then that's starting that window early, before you go to bed. So now you have a longer window of time where insulin can really come down and allow you to kind of let the body get rid of some of this junk and allow the cells to become more receptive so that when you do eat carbohydrates, the body's more efficient at processing them. Okay, let's talk about number 4, which is alcohol. I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to hear me say, oh, you can have some alcohol, it's all going to be fine. It's really not going to be fine. You know, for a long time, fatty liver disease was the thing that we saw with alcoholics. When they were really pounding the alcohol, it was creating this problem. It wasn't until kind of recently they were like, oh, wait a second, people are getting this and they don't have alcoholic issues. What do we call that? I don't know, non-alcoholic fatty liver? Maybe they didn't feel creative that day, but that's what they came up with. So this is a relatively new issue. So you got to understand that if it was only happening before with people that are drinking alcohol, you got to figure that's probably not a good idea. So if you're going to drink alcohol and think that you're going to fix this, it's like you have this leaky dishwasher putting water all over the floor and you're going to clean that up with a garden hose. It's not going to go well. This, you just don't drink anymore. It's really not that big a deal. It's not a necessity like a lot of people think. You still get to have a life. It's all good stuff. If you have to be drunk to enjoy life, then maybe you got to make some adjustments in life anyways. But you're going to want to get rid of this if you want to fix this. It's a liquid sugar going in, but it's also like this toxin that the liver has to filter out. So it's more work that this system that's not working great has to do. So removing this completely, if you're consuming it now, could be one of your biggest steps to reaching the right results. And step number 5 is correcting any cholestasis issues. And I'm going to put some links in the description below with some studies where the people kind of felt like this was the biggest deal to them. Like they felt like fixing this had to happen in order to correct this. And what this is all about is this is about bile becoming too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And that leads to all those issues like gallstones. And I'll put some links below as well for all these correlations between gallstones and fatty liver. But what happens is this liver here in its prime shape, it makes this soapy substance called bile that sends it down and then it stores that bile in the gallbladder. So once we eat food and acidify that food comes down here into the duodenum and then that triggers this bile to come down and help us digest that food. It kind of neutralizes those acids. It helps us emulsify all of our dietary fats. And so it's very important in the digestive process. But they see a lot in a correlation between this fatty liver stuff where this bile is just not flowing the way that it should. And they really felt like that really had to happen. And one reason this is important is because we know the liver filters out a lot of junk in the body. That's one of its major jobs. But what a lot of people don't know is a lot of that filtered junk goes into the bile. So when the bile gets squirted down here, it's carrying this junk through the intestinal trackway, and then that junk goes through there and it goes out the back door when we poop like a champion. So this is one of the main detox pathways for the body. So when that bile becomes too thick and sticky to flow, then all that junk that the liver filtered out, it doesn't go out the back door. It doesn't leave. The body's unable to detox the way that it wants to detox. So a lot of those toxins can get reassimilated into the system, and then the liver is filtering them out all over again. It's like, hey, I did this. Why am I doing this again? So then eventually the liver gets overwhelmed and it can't do all the jobs it's supposed to do. So when we're looking at this problem, we need to understand that the liver has a lot of jobs. You start to see these correlations between, somebody has fatty liver issues and they also start to have these hypothyroid type symptoms kind of show up. because the liver is involved in converting that thyroid hormone to the active form. So if it can't get converted in the liver, a lot of times there's not enough of that active thyroid hormone to allow the thyroid to function correctly, and the person starts to have all these hypothyroid issues. You know, when you look at the folks that are real upset about this cholestasis stuff, which is just bile becoming too thick, we have to understand that that bile really helps us break down our dietary fats so that we can use them. If the bile's not flowing, we can't really emulsify those dietary fats so that they turn into something that the body can use. If they can't be digested and broken down correctly, then they can become rancid and they become a problem for the body. The body's got to try to figure out how to get rid of them. So, you know, you wonder, is that part of what's going on here? Is that why these vegetable oils are so problematic in this story? Just because they're the wrong types of fats for us to be having in the body. And when fats can't be broken down correctly, they kind of become the wrong type of fats. Is that part of what's the liver's like, hey, I'm just trying to help out, get some of this junk out here, but then all these fats accumulate in the liver and become problematic? Is that exactly what's happening? I don't know. You know, I don't know. But when we start to see all these correlations and we start to see people taking steps to improve these issues and it creates improvement there, then it's kind of worth at least listening to a little bit. So the biggest mistakes we see with people with this is when they're like, oh, I'm going to do a low-fat diet because I got too much fat in my liver, so I'm going to lower the fat in my diet. And that doesn't help at all. We also see people say, oh, I got to do a bunch of liver cleanses. I'm going to buy all these liver cleanse products to cleanse out my liver. And that's really not going to do anything if the problem is that the sugars are too high and creating all this excess fat storage. So liver cleanses don't seem to be really beneficial in this scenario. What we like to see people do is improve any bile flow issues, because then the body can detox the way that it's supposed to. You're just allowing the body to function like it wants to function, and that's about the best detox that you can do. The body is very good at detoxing. Just allow it to detox the way that it should. So if bile isn't flowing correctly, you really want to take steps to improve that. And if you're not sure, we'll put a link in the description below for our video on 10 signs of poor bile flow, so you can see, do I have a lot of these things going on? Do I need to take steps to improve that problem? Snacking is another big mistake. If you're continuing to eat all throughout the day, then every time you do that, you're going to raise that insulin up. And that insulin's going to go higher, and your body's going to be less receptive to the glucose and create those insulin-resistant problems. So we really like to see people eat, you know, main meals throughout the day and not just snack all throughout the day like they used to tell us to do in the 80s. And I'll put some links to some studies below that are showing some good results from people using some intermittent fasting when they're trying to deal with this issue. And one good side of the intermittent fasting is that you're giving a longer stretch of the day to allow that insulin to come down, allow the body to process glucose a little bit better. But one thing you really want to keep an eye on is that when a person is fasting, then there's no food getting acidified, which means the food's not going to come down here and trigger this bile to flow. And if the bile just stays there in the gallbladder, it continues to concentrate. That's one of the gallbladder's jobs, is to concentrate that bile. So if a person's going a really long time without eating, it's not being called on, and it stays there and it concentrates and it can get thicker, and then we get that cholestasis or even gallstones or sludge and all those kind of problems. So we want to be careful with that when we're fasting. Maybe we want to take steps to thin out the bile so that it's really flowing well before we implement any type of intermittent fasting things that might be beneficial in this area. Because when somebody's fasting when they really shouldn't, it seems to raise a lot of stress hormones, and some of those stress hormones, like estrogen, can thicken up that bile and magnify this problem that a lot of these folks were really worried about with this. So we'll put a link in the description below for our video on who should not use intermittent fasting, so you can see some malfunctions and imbalances that you might need to correct before you qualify to use that. You don't want to put yourself in a worse situation by trying to do the right thing. So you can see what's creating the problem from person to person can really vary greatly. So it's why it's a little bit confusing about what do I do? What step's going to be the best step? Well, we don't know, because it could be different for every single person. But it's not a situation where you want to wait until you're on the organ donors list to start putting things in motion. It's really easy to reduce your carbohydrates. It's easy to put the vegetable oil in the trash. It's really easy to say, I'm not going to drink anymore. And there's steps you can take to improve bile flow to make sure that's not a problem. So just be willing to do your homework, be willing to do things that you might not love to do, but you don't love that either, so why not do what's going to help the situation? And you can even jump over right now and check out our video on 5 steps to improve bile flow to see if there's any steps that you can implement right away to get things moving in the right direction. I can't wait to hear about your results.